how this 34 South African man came up to be the co-founder of one of the few unicorns in Africa.
This is what we will see in the CEO story with Melvin Lubega. In this episode, you will learn how Melvin ended up being the first entrepreneur of his family, why he has left BCG as a consultant to launch his own company, and what made him decided to turn into an investor. Let's dive in the CEO story with Melvin Lubega.
Okay, Melvin. So for this second episode with you, we'll talk more about your personal journey. So we are here to talk about you as an entrepreneur, you as an investor, and you as Melvin for this CEO story. So to start...
Thank you for having me on your show.
Oh my God.
So to start, can you tell us how was Melvin as a child when you were little?
I think it depends who you asked.
You have different
my
personalities,
mother says I am the last born so far.
How many children, brother, do you have?
So yeah, I got two siblings, older brother, older sister. And so if you had to ask them, maybe my mother would say I'm an angel. I don't know if my siblings may say the same.
No,
so
I don't
that's
think
why it's
so.
all about perspective. But I think definitely younger Melvin was... Yeah, I think, definitely I grew up in a home of love. I think, definitely, with my siblings, with my parents as well. I think there was a sense of, because you were so loved at home, when you went into the world, you went with a sense of confidence. That, hey, look, I've got this space at home that really supports me. And I think that has enabled me to, be a bit more free-spirited, as it were.
And did you have, any dreams, when you were young? I don't know, maybe.
Yeah, so, when I was younger, I really cared about, I was a Boy Scout for many years.
Okay.
So, I really enjoyed the outdoors. And so, always used to enjoy biography and collecting animal specimens and that kind of thing. So
and where that? In South Africa, right?
South Africa, yes, South Africa.
Joburg?
Joburg,
Okay.
yes, South Africa. And so I thought I was going to maybe come into that, realm of biology, animal collecting specimens, something of that nature. And so that was the aspiration. But I think definitely as I, went to high school and so forth, then obviously had more of a passion around numbers and quantitative and how numbers affect business. And so that's
More
how
scientific.
I chose, yeah. So I chose to study actuarial science, statistics, and did my undergrad in that. And then ultimately I did my postgrad, again, in more public policy, but that was more function of trying to think about, my theory is this, I think no company can have as big an impact as a state or a country in terms of number of people impacted. And so it's just thinking about how do you partner between public and private partnerships to actually make things happen at scale. But always been, so it's been a weird journey, going from more nature driven, being more Boy Scout, and then finding myself in the quantitative world. Yeah.
Interesting.
And we all have these kind of key moments in our lives that kind of shaped who we are. What would be yours?
So if I look at my body now, it is probably the December food we ate, because it's definitely shaped my current form and belly. Still too early in the year to have lost that December. I think for me, if I think about my journey, I think there have been definitely different seminal parts. I think often the most valuable experiences only make sense in hindsight.
Yeah, sure.
And I think definitely for me, the big thing was, so I grew up with a single mother. So my father passed away when we were eight years old through a car accident. And I think when you're that young, you don't really appreciate what death means. But I think the strength I saw through my mother, older brother, my older sister, when I was so young, I think was very formative, because, my parents were very much like all African parents, study hard. And my parents, all got scholarships to all the schools they went to. My dad had 2 PhDs, my mother studied abroad. They're all about education. And the reality is, the first business I built was one in education, because I saw the transformative effect education had in my family. Because yes, some of my aunts and uncles are still in the rural areas in the village in Uganda. But it's because my parents took the education seriously, and me seeing that I was able to say, actually, hey, maybe by just focusing on one's education and working hard, you can actually change your circumstances.
Sure.
And so I've been very intentional about not only how I approach my education, but more importantly, how I think about learning more broadly as a way to transcend one's social barriers. And I think that experience has been transformative in the same way. And I've been very blessed, I think, throughout my life as a function of that, then to attend really good schools and have really good friends and classmates who've really invested in me. I think, as a family, we're a very prayerful family. But the reality is that the blessings I've received in my life far exceed the ones we've prayed for. And so I think there's something to be said about the world giving and ushering good vibes towards you. And I think, my mother comes from a fairly large family, so she has 35 siblings.
Oh my.
Granddad was a loving man.
Yes.
Very
loving.
And my mother was very intentional when we were growing up, saying like, look, in December, we're going to go to the village. There's no running water, no electricity, and you're going to, spend some time, the family there. And some of those things where, one, it also gives you different exposure, but also, gives you perspective around certain things. But in the same vein, also it allows you to know your humble beginnings. So you don't get lost in like, oh, no, I'm in the city now, I'm a city kid. I'm traveling to fancy places. And I think for me, that's been so formative in my understanding of the world, to not only work hard, but also appreciate different backgrounds and experiences.
And at that time, what was your vision about like what you want to do just after school? Because you started at the BCG, like consultancy,
yes.
like every
intelligent
people
from business schools.
Yeah, from business school, not intelligence, because
not
intelligence is like
it's very subjective.
Intelligence is subjective, but
fine, guys.
No,
I don't think guys are quite smart at BCG. I mean, like,
you.
Nah, shame. Not going to actually find out when I began at BCG. So at BCG, I was.
Why BCG? Why like
so
the
first of all,
consultants?
don't you think green's a good color on me?
I think yeah.
Thank you. So
Yeah.
I mean, like,
But
when a color works, you got to be consistent. Brig is green, Go One's green, BCG's green.
That's true.
Hey,
that's so your color.
if the shoe fits, guys.
That's true. But you could like have like the yellow and black and white,
Just
what I mean.
black and yellow must be a Lambo, but otherwise, fair enough. But I think definitely to your question around like why BCG. So, when I was considering my first job, I think what really attracted me to BCG were the people. So BCG, I was BCG's first associate in Africa. And so when I joined, there were 4 of us in a small co-working space in Sandton, Nelson Mandela Square. But I think the partners who were pioneering the African office had actually done work with BCG for the last 10, 15 years elsewhere in the world. But really just high quality people from whom I really wanted to learn. I think and the one thing I found about BCG consultants was they're very smart people, but they were like very humble, and just like learning from them was amazing. And so being, obviously, like when you're young, you don't know much. So it's like, low base, high growth. And so everything's exciting. You like see someone do like crazy shortcuts in Excel, you're like, do it again.
I want to see it.
Yeah. And so I found it was a good place to learn and also get a good business grounding. I think, whilst I don't think I'm bad at business now, but I think, consulting gave me the language to understand business, the mindset to think through business problems effectively. And I think that for me is something which I'm grateful for, and I've applied it in different spaces I've been in. And you can take it for granted because it's almost like, no one is grateful for breathing or knowing how to breathe because you do it so much. So I think it's almost like when you've done things to the point where it becomes just like a default, I think that's where the foundations are often laid in such companies.
That's true.
And what was your trigger to become an entrepreneur?
Yeah.
Because you could have stayed like a consultant for
Years,
earning a lot of money.
I think, I asked myself a simple question. So after I was BCG, got the scholarship to Oxford, and I remember the managing partner at the time said, Melvin, because I think he did his business school a long time ago in the US, and you're saying, Melvin, and you go and do your postgrad, you might see ideas, meet friends you want to work with, and you don't want to feel tied to an organization to have to come back. And I went like, my blood was green. I was like, guys, I'm coming back to BCG. Like, don't tell me nothing. But it was almost in like my, as a mentor and friend being like, hey, Melvin, no, just don't be afraid. Like, don't worry. You did great work at BCG. You're one of the top performing consultants in the region. Like, but just be open-minded to what opportunities you may come across. And so definitely approach the problem with a sense of like, what problems that I experienced in building my businesses or seen that I wanted to try and explore. And that's why I did my master's in education technology in my second master's, because I was like, something within the human capital learning space is broken. Because when I was a consultant, they were paying us lots of money to solve problems that were often a result of companies not investing in their people. Yet when I was an angel investor, I was investing in small companies, the biggest problem was, how do we find people with the right skills for the jobs that we're hiring? And so the small guys weren't getting it right, the big guys weren't. And I think that's where I think the lens of saying like, look, having gone through, let's say, the education space was, is there a problem I can be solving that I'm uniquely placed to do? Because my biggest concern was this, I was quite badass with my BlackBerry, showing my age here, and Excel and PowerPoint. But in the same vein, I felt to ask myself the question, like, am I solving a problem and doing something that I'm uniquely placed to do? I felt like there are many good consultants in the world, but what am I as Melvin uniquely placed to do? Given my experience, my exposure, the skills, the things I've experienced in my life.
Your personal mission.
Exactly. And so that's where I said, look, as an entrepreneur, that is where I'm better placed. And it's not necessarily saying, I can't be in a big business. I mean, look, I still think I could be a good big business CEO. But could that big business be our venture fund or something else? It can be. And so I think we mustn't, discount the big business you're building to be the one that you actually end up leading.
And at the very beginning, what did give you some confidence about being an entrepreneur? Did you have some entrepreneurs in your family or around you that kind of supported you at the beginning, or?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So I'm the black sheep in the family because I'm the only non-doctor. So my father's a doctor, my mother's a doctor, grandmother's a midwife, my grandfather's a doctor, my older brother's an orthopedic surgeon. He married a doctor. So there's lots of doctors out there. So
Okay.
I'm black sheeping quite hard right now. But I think definitely also but also that being said, my father was an entrepreneur and he always took me to take risks and build businesses and invest in things and so forth. So it wasn't necessary that there was support because I think at that point in time there wasn't money in the house to support and we can give you study hard and stay in school. But I think definitely what I really enjoyed in my journey is I'm very big on reading biographies, and so how do I learn from other entrepreneurs that have necessarily gone the journey before? And so for me, it's more so saying how do I learn from someone's story? What can I extract? And that I think has been very valuable. And that's open to everybody. I mean, you can go buy a 10-euro biography of someone and just learn so much of the lessons they learned on their business journey. And so very big on doing that. I think there's just, so much knowledge and so many lessons one learns from that perspective. But I think definitely the support one gets in from the family, I think is different and probably even more important because to your point, even if I knew if I failed in my startup and I went back to my mother's house and said, look, Mom, I tried. I'm coming back from my bunk bed, downstairs. Because you come from a loving family where, it's okay for you to fail, you'd be like, okay, you don't feel judged.
Yeah.
And I think when you have that safety, you're able to also take greater risks. And yes, look, and for many Africans, many of us are supporting many people in our families, paying school fees, all these things. But I think it's that sense of it's also okay to fail. And I think that's the biggest thing as Africans. And I think as friends, as parents, we can actually teach our kids, but even just share with our friends. Because I think what you often find, I think to the question that was asked in our previous episode around the difference between, let's say, entrepreneurs in Africa and maybe the US, is I find in the US people embrace failure more.
Yes.
And so if you embrace failure more, you're likely to take more risks and therefore at some point get a higher return. Whereas because I think it's almost like a faux pas to be like, oh, you failed, oh my gosh,
who are you?
Shame on you.
And I think because of that, people either when they build and push, they don't push as much. So guys are doing side hustles, supposed to be this is my business, this is me. I'm doing this thing. So I'm doing it on the side here, just trying something small.
Hear my pitch.
Exactly, you don't push. And I think for me, that's where if we embrace failure culturally, we're able to, I think, achieve a lot more.
Just before you said that, you've read a lot of biography of entrepreneurs. Do you have one to share?
Yeah. So look, actually, the Fiona. So one thing so there's one called What It Takes. Steve Schwarzman. So he built one of the largest asset managers in the world.
Okay.
And just his journey, where I think often we paper over what it takes to build a big business. And often people look in hindsight and be like, oh no, he was a white Jewish male in New York. Of course, he ended up building a big, asset manager. But you discount but you missed the nuance of the work he put in, how he showed up, the family he came from, and how wherever room he was in or space he was in, he strove for excellence, whether that was, in his undergrad or in high school. And just that pushing oneself to do better than what the average, even when you're starting at Lehman Brothers, whatever it was, it's about pushing yourself. And I think that's where you often discount the role of showing up where you are, whether that's in a classroom, in a podcast. You just never know. He'll be out there. I think that's something which I greatly appreciate. Another one which I really like is The Hard Thing About Hard Things. And I think particularly as I found there, I remember, I think it came out actually as we were doing Y Combinator in 2015. The book came out, and I think so as a lover of rap music, so every chapter starts with a rap verse. And so just I think also very few people actually share their failures as detailed and look, we messed up here, I don't know what was going on. I think it also just makes it more relatable, because often when you're building, you ask yourself the question what am I doing wrong? Because everyone dealing with these issues.
Yes.
And so I'm very big on communities of entrepreneurs. I'm part of a community called Endeavor of some entrepreneurs from different countries around the world, and just being able to realize what you're dealing with is not unique. I think that being validated through stories is so important.
Interesting.
And talking about failures, what was your biggest failures with Go One, and what did it teach you
So far.
so far?
So far, you have
Many others to come, maybe.
We don't wish you that, but to learn, you have to.
I think I'm very. I think one thing about the beauty of being an entrepreneur is that you will accelerate your learning because you're gonna make so many mistakes. You can look back and be like, how am I sitting here today and still like having survived given the things you did in the early days? But I think some of the things. So I often think like people make a business, they can also break a business. And I think one of my biggest things, especially learnings from like building the businesses back in the day, was not letting go of people who weren't necessarily the right fit for the company or the role they were in. I think there's always a level of grace, and you want people to grow and scale. And I'm a big believer that as a manager, it's your role to make sure people grow and develop. But in the same vein, it's about knowing when is someone toxic to the organization and not letting that fester. And I think it's something which is hard because, especially in a startup, people are often leaving good jobs to come build with you where they're probably getting paid less, doing more work.
Yeah.
And you're like, this person did that to be part of this vision, but if they're not the right fit, ultimately, especially in a startup space where you're burning money, you having someone there for another 1 or 2 months extra when they aren't adding the value could actually mean the business dies and everyone loses their jobs.
Yes.
I think it's about being decisive in that regard. I think that's definitely some of the failings early on in my journey because I wasn't able to make that link as strongly.
And it's interesting, as an entrepreneur, like how did your role and also mindset evolve, all along your journey? Like, did you change some things about your mindset while you were growing?
So you guys ever watch like a Tyler Perry movie or like a Eddie Murphy movie where like one person is like 4 different actors or like one actor is like 4 different characters? I think early on in the business, you're the guy like you're doing, like when they say I like speak to your manager, you're doing the sales calls, you're doing the CEO calls, you're doing like so the customer success. It's like, oh, you're looking for your finance. Oh, hi, yes, finance. Like, and so I think you go from that, and I think it's important. I think especially early stage too. I used to tell myself back in the day, I wouldn't hire someone for a role that I haven't tried to do myself, just because, especially in the early stage, you want to know what you want someone to actually do for you. Otherwise, it's be like, anyone can sell you. Oh, no, I'll do marketing. Just do marketing stuff.
Yes,
you don't know what that actually means for your business. But I think definitely, whether it's early stage or later stage, even just in big corporates, again, like I say, it comes back to people. And I think your role as a manager is to manage people. And so for me, it's about saying, how can I hire the right people, help them set the vision and strategy for the organization, give them the resources, and allow them to thrive. And so then my role becomes, how do I clear away blockers for you to succeed? Because you can't hire smart guys and not let them grow.
Yeah. But, sometimes entrepreneurs are not good managers. Like, how did you step up as a manager, like, during your journey? Did you learn, were coached, or I don't know?
Yeah, I asked myself the question of, so something I'm very big on is, when I came out of undergrad was, I used to always have a notebook and I take notes of, because the one thing about consulting is quite nice, you work on different projects with different managers at different periods of time, right? And so I used to take notes of like, what did I like about how this person managed me? Or what did they do differently? What can I want to replicate one day when I'm a manager? And it's like, just take notes of like, that was nice. Like, and then so for me, how I manage today is a function of the managers I've had. And yes, not all of them have been good, but I try to take the best elements of them and saying, how can I be that? Because the same way, like, look, no one ever leaves a bad company, they leave a bad manager.
Yeah.
And so the question is, how are you able to then say, be the manager I want to have, or I wish I had when I was in that particular role? And that's more how I think about it. So it's more about continual improvement and also being self-reflective, as opposed to haven't not read some like business school book on how to manage people, at least not yet.
And today, what is your role at Go One?
Yeah. So today I'm a non-exec and obviously a shareholder.
Okay.
So not active on the day-to-day of the business from that perspective.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, so Andrew, my business partner, is our CEO of Go One, and I mean, so him and Chris are our co-CEOs in the business, and so ultimately they're my co-founders, and I'm very comfortable with them to take the baton and push it forward. Also because I found that I asked myself, given where I find myself now, where can I add the most value? And I think Go One's a fairly mature business now. I've brought in some very senior guys, and the marginal value add of myself in a certain seat is different than when it was, let's say, early on in our journey. And that being said, I really want to do a lot more on the continent. I think Go One over the last few years has grown a lot, but grown a lot outside of Africa, which is good. But in the same vein, I want to do more stuff focused on the continent.
Cool.
Yeah.
And what's your plan to do that?
Well, look, ultimately, so look, so obviously now we're very focused on like how do we help the next generation of entrepreneurs on the continent, and so that's primarily through our VC fund, which we built out with Briga. And so me, that's really saying like, how do I take those school fees and pay them forward? And so when you think about like, and being an investor is interesting because whilst you're deploying capital, you also sometimes feel like a co-founder in a business because you're serving on the board, you're helping entrepreneurs. And I really enjoy that. So something which I realized I began to enjoy when I was at BCG in consulting. Because you're often working with business leaders and like trying to solve business problems as different industries, different sectors. The only difference is I think as a consultant, I never felt like you had skin in the game. It's like, I thought my slides were epic, but like going from a slide to actually implementation was different. Whereas I find as a thought partner and sparring partner to my entrepreneurs, yes, I'm not going to always agree with them, but you feel like you're able to add value and key interventions in the business, which I really like because it allows you to almost use every arrow in your quiver. And like it's like going to a fight with like a hand tied behind your back. I feel like I can punch, I can kick, I can headbutt. And that's what I like about, being a VC that is aligned to being a partner with businesses.
Yeah. And is there anything that surprised you when you turned on investor, and maybe things that you understood from the point of view that you have now, and that was in face of you before when you were an entrepreneur? Like,
I think different perspectives. I think, often it's funny, right? When you're an entrepreneur, you think, VCs just go there, they write a check, and then they just go and play golf the whole day, and you're like, guys, this is the life I want to. Like, I think ultimately, if anything, I'd say being a VC even takes more time because what you're competing with is like you want to invest in your businesses, you want to be out there finding the next businesses, you have to support the current and best businesses you're investing in. You have to be able to pattern switch when one calls you, another one calls you. Sure, you're dealing with like, fintech in Guinea versus clean tech in South Africa versus like HR tech in like whatever, Senegal, and you're able to like, pattern switch across that. But in the same vein, also then you are like, continually engaging your clients and your people like the LPs who are giving you money to manage for them. And so it's always that blend of time where time's a constraint, I think, in that particular ecosystem, which I think it definitely is a lot methodical. I think for me, the biggest change is more so thinking about world as a angel investor versus as a VC investor, right?
Okay.
I think as an angel investor, the right is like, yes, a friend can say, hey, Melvin, I'm building this business. Come give me some money. I'll support you. Like, yes, I like you. He has whatever, X 100,000 or X 1,000, whatever it is, right? But the reality is often when you're an angel investor, you don't necessarily care that much about economics and returning a fund and so forth. So, everyone can put, whatever small amounts of money in a company and say, I got an angel check there. But the difference, I think, between, let's say, investing in, let's say, US and Africa is that in US, if you own 0.01% of Uber, you can probably return your fund and do well. Whereas in Africa, if you own 0.01% of the company, you probably won't be able to return it. But even if it's like all the unicorns you've been in, if you only put in $10,000 that seed, you wouldn't have been able to return much of the money you put out there. And so it's about just being intentional about thinking through selecting the best. And I find now, having been an entrepreneur, which is, I don't know if it's a good or a bad thing, I just have a higher hurdle or expectation of what I want to see in an entrepreneur. Because where the bodies hide, when like you're like, I know that the watch is telling me that number looks a bit off there.
I've been there,
and I feel like I'm a bit more skeptical than I was before. It's because I had the experience of building, and I've also pitched. I mean, I've done lots of pitches, and so I think that's both a benefit, obviously, to our partners and LPs because we hopefully are making better investments and supporting companies differently. But also, I'm like, am I being too hard, man? Because if guys was hard on me, I wouldn't have gotten my money. So like, but it's different.
Okay.
Yeah.
And maybe just to finish, actually, because we are coming to the end of this episode. If you had like 4 values on which you hold on when you make a decision, when you just the 4 values which define who you are, what would they be?
Yeah, probably say 3 immediately come to mind. I think one is about looking for ways to partner and collaborate. I'm very big on is this a win-win-win situation? And that often comes down to how do you see the human in someone as opposed to necessarily the transaction if it's business or the personal side. And so something I always ask myself is this the most loving thing I can do? And this is true in the business context as well as in even personal settings, right? I mean, if you think about example of, if you are, firing someone, how do you fire them in a compassionate way? If you're doing a business deal, yes, we're not here to make love, but what's the most caring human thing I can do? Because someone on the other side also has stakeholders they have to negotiate to or account to. Now, if, I screw them in this deal, what does that mean for them? The same thing when you're making relationship, decisions about, let's say, personal things as well. Same thing, So I think showing up with love, care, and concern, thinking about how you can collaborate, I think is important from that perspective. I'm also very big on taking a longer term perspective. So when you think about your decisions, ask yourself, future you'll be proud of the decision you're making now. And I think this is true, personal, professional. And also I find if you take a longer term view, for example, if those of you are married, if you have a spouse or whatever it is, if you knew that, the spouse is the person you're going to be the rest of your life, I think you'd show up differently. You wouldn't disrespect them and be late or not listen to their feelings or cheat on them or whatever, because you realize, hey, this is the person who's my life. You show up. Imagine if the business partner you had today was the business partner for the rest of your life and you had no way of getting out of that relationship with the business partner. You would show up differently in that business relationship. I think it's about just taking that view. So you build, I think longer bonds, I think is a big one there. I think then also when it comes down to, I think the final part of decision making is, what about how I'm making this decision is unique to me? Like, because Melvin's making a decision, how is it different? Because if the decision looks the same for everybody else, then I'm not making a decision. I think it's very easy. Because things like I have a privilege of serving on, some big company boards, listed company boards, and it's very easy to just be the yes man. But the question is, how is the decision making different because you're on the board? What unique thing do you bring? I think that's something I ask myself across that.
Cool.
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah. That's a great transition for the next episode.
Yes.
Physiotherapy.
So see you for the next episode.
See you there.
Melvin.